Welcome back to the Last Days Book Club, where we're reading the book entitled Dwelling in the Secret Place by Sonica Veith. This is an ebook available online for free at clashofminds.com, where you can download it and read along with us. Sonica Veith is the spouse of well-known evangelist, lecturer, university professor, and zoologist Dr. Walter Veith. And this true story is a chronicle of their life together, their ministry, their numerous trials, tribulations, and hardships, as well as their successes, victories, and triumphs. In our last reading, we covered chapter 6, entitled Into the Wilderness, where Sonica and Walter made a decision to be baptized into the SDA faith. They started going to church with Werner and his wife and would have fellowship dinner with them and their friends after service. It was very uncomfortable at first, for everyone were vegetarians and they were not. It took them a while to get accustomed to their new friends and habits, but soon enough, they all got along well enough. At their baptism, Sonica was delighted and thought that the choir was like heavenly angels singing as they came out of the baptismal pool. On one such Sabbath, Walter decided to stay home with the children while the others went to church, and he began to study the book of Job. While reading, doubt assailed his scientific mind that Job's sores could not just erupt as they had without any previous infection or sickness, and as a result, he began to doubt the whole Bible. It wasn't long before a sore broke out on his leg and started burning, and then started oozing liquid. "Okay, God, I believe you now," he said, and in a few minutes, that sore dissipated and soon disappeared. Later, while driving home, he related the incident to Sonica and again began to doubt, putting it down to coincidence. But again, the sore burst forth, worse than before, and according to Sonica, doubting Thomas now became a believer. After a while, with their newfound faith, they realized they had to change. Together with Werner and Inga, they decided they had to leave the city and move to the country and take up farming. Together, they found and purchased a farm. Walter had to take out the loan in his name since Werner had not yet been able to sell his home and business. Eventually, they got it together and made the move. It was not long before a litany of tragic and disappointing events took place that tested their faith. First, they lost both their cars to unexpected accidents. Next, a neighboring farmer, whom they had agreed with to carry their milk to the local cheese factory until they got a holding tank, never paid them for the 3 months' worth of milk they gave him. Then, their wheat fields, which were doing exceptionally well and grew higher and fatter than the neighboring farms, got attacked by a swarm of finches and was destroyed. When they rented a harvester to harvest the rest of the wheat, someone threw sugar into the gas tank, causing great expense and great delay. Someone also continuously sabotaged their water supply, even cutting their pipes. Then, Werner and his wife left and moved to Australia. And then, the local church folk started spreading rumors that their farm was haunted because of their occult history, and that was why Werner left. When they were at their wits' end and felt they could endure no more, they went on their knees, praying to God, then wrote God a letter explaining how they had followed his counsel, kept his commandments, changed their diets, and moved to the country. Now they were broke and dejected, so they wrote out his promises and claimed them in his name. The very next day, Walter received a phone call with a job offer at a university in Somerset West. At the same time, an Adventist couple appeared on their doorstep looking for work on a farm, since they were thrown out from the farm they had worked on in Zimbabwe because they wouldn't work on the Sabbath. They turned the farm over to them, moved into a house they had found to rent in the town, enrolled their children in an Adventist school, and found that by providence, on 2 different occasions, someone had anonymously left an envelope with 150 rand in their car, just enough to keep them in food and clothes for the kids until Walter would get his first check. Please remember, dear listeners, that you can download this book for free at clashofminds.com and read along with us as we pick up the story today in chapter 7, entitled, In My Father's Business. Luke chapter 2, verse 49. And he said unto them, How is it that ye sought me? Wist ye not that I must be about my Father's business? My brother and his family, and my father and stepmother, also happened to be living in Somerset West at that time. Soon after we arrived and settled into our new environment, we were invited to a family gathering at my brother's house. Since we moved to the farm, we had had very little contact with our family, apart from my brother, who visited us on the farm once. Walter spent a whole Sunday afternoon explaining the Bible prophecies and the reasons for our change of religion to him. He was speechless when he realized how accurate the predictions in the Bible were, and enthusiastically took some books home to show his wife. Not long thereafter, he returned the books and said he didn't have time to read them, without one word further upon the subject. He probably realized that acknowledging that he had seen and heard the truth required too much sacrifice, as did the rich young ruler in Luke 18 and verse 18. The price the Savior asked was too high, and he turned and sadly walked away from Jesus. I don't care what you people say, but tonight I will have my pork, said my father, as he defiantly waved a bag with pork ribs under our noses. We hadn't said a word to my family about what we eat and what we don't eat, and wondered how he knew. Nor did we try to tell others what they should and shouldn't eat. That evening turned out to be very stressful for us when my stepmother tried to convince us that we still had to climb many steps before we would even begin to understand the Bible, which, according to them, was nothing more than an esoteric book for the adept. Paul, according to her, was a spiritualistic medium, and the disciples of Jesus were learning how to reach the level of Jesus, who was only one of the many so-called descended or reincarnated masters that had attained to that spiritual level. She also taught the popular course, A Course in Miracles, where people are brought to believe that they can perform the same miracles that Jesus did, and even more. It was impossible to get them to listen to our view, and we didn't want to argue, but went home that night, pained by their attitude and concerned for their eternal life, wondering how we could ever make them understand. The simple salvation of the Bible seemed like foolishness in their eyes, impossible to comprehend. And yet it is so profound that thousands of books have been written on the subject of salvation, and millions of educated people, as well as brilliant scholars, have understood it. The next morning, we received a phone call from the hospital to inform us that something serious had happened to my father. He had been in the train on his way to work when he had an aneurysm. The main artery from the heart, the aorta, ruptured, and normally he would have bled to death. But as he lost consciousness, his body leaned forward, obstructing the blood flow from the artery, thus saving his life. After many weeks in hospital, he was sent home with most of his gangrenous bladder and toes removed. The doctors had warned him repeatedly before the incident to stop smoking and drinking alcohol and to avoid a high cholesterol diet, but he evidently hadn't taken the advice seriously. The once energetic, self-sufficient man was now reduced to a sad heap of bones in a wheelchair. My heart ached for my father. If only we had known all these wonderful truths earlier, we could have taught him the basic health principles, and he might have listened and been spared this trauma. If only mankind understood that God has their welfare in mind. His precepts are for our protection and prosperity, and not to restrict us. For I know the thoughts that I think toward you, saith the Lord, thoughts of peace and not of evil, to give you an expected end. Jeremiah 29, verse 11. During this time, a man from the Adventist Businessman's Forum approached Walter and offered to send him to the Geoscience Institute at the Adventist University of Loma Linda in the USA for a 6-week field trip to gather more scientific evidence on the creation account and the biblical universal flood. This offered him the opportunity to study with 2 of the best creation scientists of that time, one an expert on flood geology, particularly regarding paraconformities, that is, time gaps in the geological column, and the other a world authority on the petrified forest formations. At first, Walter was not able to accept the offer because the students had just started writing exams at his university. Although the students were finished, there was no way he would be able to get 6 weeks leave, especially since he had just started working there. Then something really amazing happened. Riots suddenly broke out. The exams were frozen for 6 weeks, and no one was allowed to leave the campus except those lecturers whose students had all finished their exams. Walter happened to be one of the few fortunate ones, and when he asked the head of department what he should do during the next 6 weeks, the man said, "I don't care what you do. Go to the moon if you like." Within a few days, Walter was on his first overseas trip to an American Adventist institute, unknowingly leaving me behind to face some fierce trials all on my own. It became increasingly clear to us that the enemy of God was targeting our family to try and stop us from growing and discovering more and more of the wisdom and knowledge of God. One day, When I went to visit my dad at their home, he greeted me with his tired smile and asked me to help him to get to the bathroom. He had been sitting for hours all alone in his wheelchair in the lounge, not able to feed himself or go to the bathroom. The untidy house smelt of old urine and dried blood, and the dirty dishes were piled up in the kitchen. "Where is Merle?" I asked anxiously. "She's busy in the bedroom. Don't disturb her," he said in a weak voice. "Busy with what? When last did you have something to eat?" I'm fine, he whispered tiredly. "Just leave her." I managed to clean him up somewhat and made him a sandwich from something in the fridge that could very well have been dog food. The next day, I decided to bring them both some lunch. I made soup with home-baked bread and a baked dish and took it to their house. My dad was again sitting all alone in his wheelchair in the lounge, while Merle had locked herself in the bedroom. I gave him his food and then took a tray with her meal to the bedroom. When I knocked, she said she was sick and refused to open the door. I started cleaning the kitchen, and at my father's request, I started to tidy and vacuum the lounge. Suddenly, Merle's bedroom door flung open, and with enough energy to climb Mount Everest, she stormed down the passage toward me like a bull aiming at a matador. "How dare you touch my things? How dare you?" she snorted, with her pale bluish eyes flashing. I just wanted to help. I thought you were sick," I stammered, and started putting the vacuum cleaner away. She turned around and marched back to her bedroom and slammed the door. It was only some time later that my dad told me that it was her ritual to communicate daily in her bedroom with her spirit guide, who often appeared to her physically and instructed her. I asked my father if he wanted to come home with me until he was better, and he nodded and said softly, "Yes, that will be fine. Thank you." The next day, I went to fetch him with our Volkswagen van and took the children with me to help their grandfather. While I was still busy getting my father's things together, Merle was constantly slinging insults at me. I just listened and tried to explain to her that it was too much for her to take care of him, and that I would bring him back as soon as he felt stronger. The next minute, she filed past me through the front door towards the children. They were sitting in the car waiting for me when she stuck her head through the window and blasted them for stealing her husband away from her. She cursed them and called them names, then disappeared back into the house and slammed the door. When I saw their bewildered faces, I was angry in my heart that she poured out her venom on defenseless little children. But as usual, I said nothing. I hated myself for not being able to stand up to anyone and wished I had Walter's sharp tongue. When we arrived home, I phoned our German friend Hilde, who was a nurse, and asked her to come and advise me how to wash and care for my father in the best way. As we turned him onto his side in his bed, we were appalled at what we saw. He had bed sores, almost as large as my hand, which had consumed away his flesh down to the bone. Hilda came every day for the first week to help and encourage him, and we noticed an improvement daily. "Why do you do this?" my father asked Hilda one day. "You don't get paid. I don't understand." "I'm a Christian," she answered in her German accent. "I love my Savior Jesus, and I love all the people he died for, and I love you too. Now you just rest and get better, and I will see you in the morning." With a gentle smile on my father's face, he closed his eyes and fell asleep. At lunchtime, the first of a number of healthy meals arrived at our door, which the ladies of the church had organized to help me cope better. I was very grateful, since I had to spend hours with my dad, washing him and changing his dressings and his bedding daily, and still take care of my 3 children and all the other household and school duties without a husband. The interest the people in the church showed in him impressed my father deeply, and he started asking questions about what we believe. Although he was still very weak, he was able to listen to some sermons on audio tape and take part in short conversations. One evening, my father was sitting in his wheelchair, and Robert, our youngest son, by now 4 years old, was lying on the couch in the living room, quietly talking to himself. The boy suddenly sat up, his eyes fixed on an area behind my father, and then he started to scream at the top of his voice. I recognized that blood-curdling sound, and a long-forgotten fear gripped my heart. I regretted not having made more time to pray and to place my family under the protection of God. With my busy schedule, I had forgotten that the enemy of souls was watching to find an entering wedge into our lives again. I rushed to pick him up, took him to my bedroom, and lay him down with me on the bed, almost tucking him in onto my body in an attempt to protect and comfort him. He was sobbing relentlessly. With eyes wide and filled with terror, he continued to stare at something behind me. I dared not look and felt almost paralyzed. "Take that thing away! Take that purple thing away!" he cried. I felt the hair rise in my neck, but I still didn't have the courage to look behind me. Instead, I said, "Listen carefully. I want you to repeat after me. Say, 'Jesus, help me.'" Through his sobs, the scared little boy said, "Jesus, help me." And the next moment, I felt a wind pass through my hair from behind me towards the window. There was no draft. The door behind me was closed. And then there was silence. I breathed a sigh of relief as Robert calmed down and fell asleep. While I was holding him, I could feel his temperature rise, and prayed silently that he would not get sick or be traumatized by the incident. I stayed with him for a while to make sure he was all right, and then left to attend to the rest of the family. After a peaceful night, Robert was up the next morning and playing as usual, as if nothing had happened. He never mentioned the incident, and nothing of that nature ever happened again. After my father had been with us for several weeks, my stepmother suddenly showed up. She had been in Johannesburg for a couple of weeks, which explains why I was unable to reach her at her home. "I've come to fetch my husband," she said as she breezed through the door like a gust straight from the North Pole. How similar this was to the time when she used to leave her now deceased son, Ivan, with my mother for weeks, and then suddenly appear in a daze to take him home as if it were nothing out of the ordinary. By now, my father was able to walk a little, and the bed sores and wounds had almost healed. The children were sorry to see their grandfather leave. Even when he was weak and sick, he was always kind and warm, with a great sense of humor. Almost a week later, Walter returned from his trip to America. He was so excited about what he had learned on his field trip to Yellowstone National Park, to the Old Faithful Geyser, the petrified forests, Mount St. Helens, and the Grand Canyon. Now, he was able to defend the biblical flood even more confidently with solid scientific evidence. A few days later, a man phoned and made an appointment to see us. When he arrived, he explained that he wanted Walter to work for him for an initial 5-year period, during which time he would be lecturing countrywide on the topic creation versus evolution. The organization would arrange the venues and ask an attendance fee to generate enough money to pay for expenses and Walter's salary. Furthermore, the man continued, Walter would have to sign a contract in which he would promise not to speak about any other aspect of our faith, but only on the question of our origins. We sat silently for a while, not saying a word. I got up to make us something to drink, and the man followed me into the kitchen. "If you take my offer, you will never have to worry about money again," he said. "I'll take care of you and your family, and Walter will have a good job that he will enjoy." Suddenly, images of our ordeal on the farm sprang up in my mind, and I could hear warning bells ringing. I remembered Psalms 118 and verse 8. "It is better to trust in the Lord than to put confidence in man." And I recalled how God Himself delivered us from a situation which seemed humanly impossible to resolve. The temptation was great, especially in view of our escalating debt on the farm and the insecurity of having only a temporary appointment at the university. But after thinking it through, Walter decided that he was not willing to make such a promise. He wasn't willing to be silent about how God, in His mercy, had taken us out of the world of misery and darkness and into the beautiful truth that God has given to His remnant church to share with a dying world. A burning desire had taken hold of his heart and mind to warn every soul on this planet that they were being deceived in almost every aspect of life, and that knowing the truth will set them free. A passion that was to become the driving force behind his every word and action. He agreed to give lectures on the subject of creation for the organization at any time, but without signing any contract or receiving any payment for his work. He was sure his commission was as given in Matthew 10, verses 7 and 8. "And as ye go, preach, saying, the kingdom of heaven is at hand. Heal the sick, cleanse the lepers, raise the dead, cast out devils. Freely ye have received, freely give." Soon after our decision, the new pastor of the Helderberg College Church started visiting us. He had heard about Walter and his evolution background, and invited him to give a few lectures during an evangelistic campaign he was conducting at the church and at Walter's alma mater, Stellenbosch. He was a tenacious man, and although little in stature, he was large in heart and faith, relentlessly pursuing his passion of saving souls. We attended his lectures, and soon our whole family grew very attached to Uncle Frenchy and Aunt Emma. The Somerset West campaign yielded some fruits, and quite a few people were baptized after the lecture series. But in Stellenbosch, Walter encountered his first public confrontation through vicious attacks and animosity from the mostly academic crowd. After his lecture, some snide personal remarks from some of his ex-colleagues left Walter no option but to expose their inconsistent and illogical paradigm. He referred them to Matthew 24, verses 37 through 39, where Jesus himself warns of a second approaching judgment, just as sure as the flood, his first universal judgment upon the earth. "Tell me, Dr. Van den Viver," he said calmly, although inwardly trembling under the joint attack from the scientists, "how can you go to church every Sunday, supposedly believing in the Bible and salvation through Jesus, and at the same time deny the flood to which Jesus himself referred?" His ex-colleague thought for a while and then said condescendingly, "Well, if Jesus said that, he must have lied." The whole audience broke out in a buzz of discussion, while Walter and Uncle Frenchy were able to greet a few people and leave unobtrusively. He was deeply disappointed that no one understood what he was trying to tell them, and struggled to come to terms with the fact that his friends and once fellow students now hated him. Many years later, he discovered that Dr. Van den Viver had, over the years, obsessively collected every scrap of information regarding Walter, his lectures, and his whereabouts. He actively opposed Walter on every possible radio and television program and ridiculed him in academic circles. Walter vowed never to return to his old university and was grateful for the text in Matthew 10 and verse 14, which supported his feelings. "And whosoever shall not receive you, nor hear your words, when you depart out of that house or city, shake off the dust of your feet." Little did he know that he was still to encounter much worse than the wrath of his ex-colleagues, and far more painful too. One day, my father phoned to inform us that they were moving back to the little holiday resort, Hermanus, where a group of Merle's New Age friends lived. He asked Walter to help him take some books to a friend and to sort out the things for him in the garage, since he was too weak to do too much lifting and carrying. When they arrived at the home of the friend, Walter and our oldest son carried the boxes up the steps, and as they entered the house, they couldn't believe their eyes. What seemed like a normal house from the outside was a sun temple on the inside. The main room was shaped in a triangle, and everything was decorated in deep purple. In the one corner was an altar draped with the sign of Aquarius, and other zodiacal symbols decorated the walls. The owner of the house greeted them friendly, and thinking that Walter was one of them, he proceeded to boast of his influence and achievements. During the conversation, Walter learned that this man was the main channel for Africa, through whom many heads of state, politicians, industrialists, and members of the medical and sporting fraternity received channeled information and advice from guides from the spiritual realm. My father was anxious to leave before the man disclosed too many secrets, but he continued to show Walter some of the letters from presidents and other world leaders, including one signed by the British Prime Minister and an American president, in which they thanked him personally for his help and guidance. We kept regular contact with my dad, and he often asked us what we believe and how we interpret certain portions of the scripture. We noticed a marked change in his attitude. He was more humble and accepting, and often spoke of how impressed he was with the Adventists, whom he called your people. During this time, tension between us and his wife grew, and we seldom visited him at his home, and to avoid tension, he preferred coming to us. However, one day, when Walter needed to fetch something at their house, he experienced something he would not easily forget. He was in a hurry as usual and hadn't prepared for a spiritual battle. After ringing the doorbell, he heard Merle call, "Come in, I'll be right there," and he walked into the lounge. As he stood there waiting, he suddenly felt a sharp pain in his side, which grew stronger and stronger, forcing him down onto the floor. As he was there, writhing in pain and struggling to breathe, he was reminded once again that there was a real battle going on between good and evil, and without God's protection, he had no chance against the onslaught of the arch enemy of God. He then suddenly remembered that he was on Satan's ground. And as he heard Merle's footsteps approach down the passage, he prayed silently that God would give him the strength to get up, so that she would not see him in such a state and gloat at his demise. After all, she believed she was equal to God and was able to perform any miracle Jesus did, and even more. And we poor souls had evidently not attained to that spiritual level. Little did she know that she had no power of her own, but that it was the spirits of devils working miracles to deceive mankind. The serpent's lie to the couple in Eden, that when they disobeyed God, they would be wise like him, was perpetuated through the ages and is still believed in many cultures and religions today. The pain started subsiding slowly, and he was able to stand up just before she entered the room. He took a deep breath, thanking God for hearing his prayer. "You look pale this morning," she said, as she handed him the object he had come for. Walter thanked her and left quickly, grateful for the cold, fresh air outside. Never again did we enter their house or any other place of occult activity without asking for the Lord's protection. A week later, we went to help them pack and move to Hermanus. "What shall we do with the books that are in the garage?" we asked as they got into the car to leave. "I don't know, just throw everything away," my father said tiredly, as he waved his goodbye, leaving us with a considerable mess to clean up, which of course served a good purpose. By now, we knew that nothing in our lives happened without a reason. While sorting through all the rubbish, we discovered some very interesting esoteric books, and other valuable material. In that dusty old garage, a whole new door was open to us. Our experiences gave Walter the opportunity to uncover more and more of this sinister world and to warn people of the deceptions taught in some religious systems and later in the secret societies. We had no idea that our years of trials and hardship would someday serve to save souls. But among all those books, there was something missing. The writings of Blavatsky, who was a theosophist and a contemporary of Ellen G. White. Her writings were channeled by spiritualist entities, or in plain terms, demons, and published by Lucifer Publishing Company, later called Lucius Trust. She was the prophetess of the New Age, and her successor was Alice A. Bailey. Her core philosophy was that of many organizations affiliated with the United Nations. She was the antithesis of the spirit of prophecy and claimed that Lucifer was the true Son of God and that all humanity, with the exception perhaps of the Adventists, as she wrote, would accept the Luciferian light for the New Age. She also claimed that modern Bible translations have been so changed that they now reflect the New Age philosophy. The complete writings of Blavatsky were nowhere to be found, and one day Walter decided to find these books and to visit the same Sun Temple where he had returned the books with my father. I was very reluctant to tread on Satan's ground, but agreed to go with him. When we arrived at the house, the security gate was closed, and Walter rang the bell. After a while, a man's voice spoke over the intercom and asked us what we wanted. "Good afternoon. I am the son-in-law of the man who returned some books to you a little while ago, and I'm here with his daughter. May we please speak to you?" Walter said. The next moment, the gate opened, and we walked up the path to the front door of the house. Suddenly, a window on the second floor opened, and a woman with wild eyes and disheveled black hair peered down while yelling unintelligible words at us. Simultaneously, the door opened, and the man asked us to wait a few minutes. He closed the door again and evidently went upstairs to silence the woman. He pulled her back in while she continued shouting and then closed the window. We felt very uneasy and prayed silently for protection from God. When he had returned, he invited us into his lounge. Here, Walter boldly asked him if he had the original writings of Blavatsky, but the man ignored him and started to display on the table all the other books that he had available. "I have read all those books," Walter said almost impatiently. "I am interested only in the original books of Blavatsky." The man stopped arranging the books on the table and turned to face Walter. "If you're looking for Blavatsky's writings, then you have arrived," he said with a strange smile. "What order do you belong to?" I could see Walter's mind assessing the situation. He couldn't lie, but he also couldn't tell the man that he needed the material to prove to people how dangerous and evil these secret societies and their doctrines are. "I don't belong to an order. I just know What my father-in-law taught me, was his truthful answer. The man started to pack away the books he had hoped to sell to Walter and shook his head. I'm sorry. I only have my own private set of Blavatsky writings, and they're not for sale. What do you want for them? I'm willing to buy them from you, Walter said eagerly. Oh, no. You can't buy them. They are priceless. And besides, after my death, they will be donated to the theology department at one of our universities. I have been teaching courses to the theologians for quite a while now, the man said proudly. Now Walter was even more determined. I really would like to have those books. Are you sure you can't get me another set? The man shook his head and was about to show us to the door when suddenly he said, I do have an old set, but it is in a foreign language. I think it's in Dutch or perhaps German. I don't know. That's a pity, Walter said without revealing his excitement. But can I see them anyway, please? The man shrugged and left to fetch the box with the books. While he was gone, Walter saw a Bible commentary on the shelf and quickly pulled out one of the books. Great was his amazement when he discovered that this was an esoteric commentary on the Bible, where Lucifer is depicted as the Son of God, the victim who was supposedly wrongly accused and thrown out of heaven by the impostor Jesus. In this commentary, typical satanic reversal was the norm. Good becomes evil, and evil becomes good. However, before the man arrived with the books, the woman on the second floor suddenly started screaming again, and he had to run upstairs to calm her down. This gave Walter more time to page through the esoteric Bible commentary. When the man returned with the books, he was quite flustered, but proudly displayed a German translation of the original writings of Blavatsky. Walter offered to pay for the set, but the man again said it was priceless. Walter then took the small amount of cash he had on him and handed it to the man. This is all I have with me. Please take it, he said, and to our utter surprise, the man accepted the money and gave us the books. We thanked the man, and grateful to leave the dark atmosphere behind, we quickly walked out of the gate before the woman could scream at us again. We realized that God had once again opened the door for us to receive the information that verified Walter's lectures. These books were used only for confirming the information and not for delving into any occult mysteries, which we knew by experience was dangerous ground for believers to venture on. We were grateful for these experiences, and in the years to come, we thanked God for the many people who listened to his lectures and tapes and accepted the biblical truth. For the first time, they understood the deceptions and the great controversy in the unseen realm between Christ and his enemy Satan, or Lucifer, as he is worshipped by numerous organizations. Through the leading of God, a loud warning went out in our country and also abroad. By word and by pen, people were made aware of the messages of the three angels of Revelation 14, and were called out of their comfort zones and out of the darkness, which they, like we did before, mistook for light. Ephesians 5 and verse 8. For ye were sometimes darkness, now are ye light in the Lord. Walk as children of light. Ephesians 5 verse 11. and have no fellowship with the unfruitful works of darkness, but rather reprove them. We had just settled down nicely in our home in Somerset West when Uncle Frenchy had other plans. "Why don't you come and work with me? I've been transferred to Paro Church and will be doing some evangelistic programs in that area. Your temporary post at the university will soon be over, and I will be speaking to the conference about offering you a job as assistant evangelist." We knew that God was once more opening a new door, but I felt sorry for our children who had to be uprooted once again and sent to a new school. Fortunately, there was another Adventist school they could attend where they would be safe from the ridicule and onslaught that would assail them in the government schools. Or so we thought. Within a few days, everything was organized. We had a new job, a church house, and a place in the Adventist school for our children. Walter started preparing slides for new lectures, and I started studying the books of Mrs. White with enthusiasm. The criticism that she was worshipped as the Adventist guru and set on a pedestal higher than the Bible proved to be totally unfounded. Her only life mission was to warn precious souls of the dangers of our time and to turn them to Jesus and the Bible. I had never been an avid reader, but this changed overnight. I couldn't wait for a stolen moment during the day to read and drink in more and still more information revealing Christian principles through studying the love and mercy-filled life of my Savior, as was portrayed by the pen of this down-to-earth lady with her heavenly wisdom. I was eager to learn about the depth of experience I missed while living as an atheist, and my heart ached for not having had the opportunity to raise our children in a secure and godly environment from birth. I envied the Adventist parents with their seemingly perfect characters and peaceful, balanced children who had absolutely no idea how hard it was to correct the inherited trait of character in ourselves and in our children, and to deal with the consequences of the mistakes we had made in our ignorance. I prayed constantly that God would reveal to my family and me a healthier physical and spiritual life. During this time, I was suffering greatly from asthma, which I had for my entire adult life, and visited a local internist who did every conceivable test on me. At last, he looked at me shaking his head and said, "I have checked you through, and I have to be honest, I have no idea what causes your asthma. You will just have to continue using your asthma pump regularly and come to see me every 6 months for a checkup." But I was determined to have my problem solved. I felt inadequate and weak from the constant coughing and wheezing and decided to try one more doctor. I had heard about an Adventist lady general practitioner and set out to find her in the telephone directory. After a couple of phone calls, I had an appointment with her straight away. She listened to my story and then handed me a pamphlet to read. Here is a whole list of food allergens. My guess is that you're allergic to dairy products. That seems to be the most common one. Try avoiding these products, especially cheese, which is hard to digest, for a few months, and see what happens, she said, as she showed me out of the door. Stop eating dairy? I thought disappointedly. That's impossible. How does one prepare food without milk and cheese? isn't there some kind of medication I could take instead? At home, I listlessly rummaged through some of my favorite recipe books and came across the herb book Back to Eden, written by physician Jethro Kloss. He described his success in placing his patients on an all-plant diet, and together with natural treatments, he managed to cure even the most difficult cases of cancer and other life-threatening diseases. He was the first person to introduce the large-scale production of soy milk in the Western world, and even provided some home recipes. Suddenly, I knew that God had heard my prayer. And since there was nothing available in the stores these days, I immediately started making my own soy milk. My only concern was that my family wouldn't accept this sudden change. But to my surprise, they were willing to give it a try for my sake, and even started to enjoy the taste after a while. Within 6 months, I had no more trouble with asthma, and even the children's coughs and sinus problems cleared up, and no more of the frequent stomach upsets for Walter. We had better health than ever before, but it came with a price. Our decision to change to a plant-based diet, which gave us so much joy, released unwarranted reaction from most members of the church and proved to cause our children's sensitive feelings great harm in their future experience with God. Our first series of lectures in Paro, together with Pastor Frenchie, had a good effect on the church and our family. The members started working together to bring the last warnings of Revelation 14 to many interested listeners. Our own children attended the lectures, and after hearing Uncle Frenchie speak on the life of Christ, our oldest son decided that he wanted to be baptized. Our shy, sensitive 12-year-old's heart warmed towards God and his fellow men, even though our decision to become Christians and to keep the Sabbath had caused much turmoil in his life. At school, he was one of the top students, but always had time to encourage and strengthen others who were struggling academically and emotionally. During our stay in Paro, Walter studied as much as he could and followed in the experienced and faithful footsteps of the best evangelist in the country. But towards the end of the year, the conference announced that they had no more funds available, and we started wondering what the next phase of our life was going to be. The Geoscience Institute had been in contact with us and offered Walter a post in the United States, but at the last minute, they also withdrew because of a change in their financial position. Our time was quickly running out. The house we lived in was needed for another pastor, and we still had no idea where we had to go. Again, God had an answer that would provide even more insights and training for future evangelistic meetings. Out of the blue, Walter was again offered a temporary post at the University of Cape Town, where he stood in for the physiology lecturer who was on sabbatical leave. By now, he had a reputation as a creationist, and the campus student body asked him to present some lectures after hours on the subject of creation versus evolution. He did not really want to create waves at the university that had just employed him, but after some considerable soul-searching, he agreed to do it. Strange as it may seem, he immediately received opposition from a colleague, a fellow zoologist, who happened to be involved with the organization On Campus Crusade for Christ. This man was a Christian, but worked for this organization as a science lecturer. Walter was surprised and asked him why he was so opposed to the idea of creation and yet lectured for a religious campus body. His answer was, "We train Christians when they come to the university to accept the theory of evolution because a belief in creation is contrary to science and makes a mockery of the Christian religion." Walter tried to reason with him about the compatibility of the Christian belief in atonement and the theory of evolution, but to no avail. Stunned that a Christian body employed people to negate what God had said, Walter, however, proceeded to give his series of lectures, which were now attended by a large student body and many academics, including geologists and zoologists. During one of his lectures on catastrophism and the universal flood, a heated debate broke out among the academics when some openly embraced what Walter was saying. But this so enraged one of the geologists that he got violently angry, got up, and in front of all the people, spat in Walter's face, calling him a liar and a concoctor of false information. Walter calmly took out his handkerchief, wiped his face, and watched as the two camps continued their heated argument. The next day, Walter produced the scientific articles published in reputable journals which corroborated his story, and again there was pandemonium and great division among the audience. Luke 12 and verse 51. Suppose ye that I am come to give peace on earth? I tell you, nay, but rather division. But soon this temporary job came to an end, and we wondered what God would provide next. Then one day, Walter received a call from the previous university where he had filled in almost a year before. The professor informed him that a junior post had become vacant and that he could apply, although this meant that he would have to start right at the bottom at a much lower salary. Walter decided to apply and leave the rest to God. A few weeks later, the professor informed him that although Walter had more than the required qualifications, the new affirmative action policy in South Africa required that the first choice should be made according to race. The professor apologized briefly and put down the phone. A feeling of helplessness slowly crept over us as it seemed that all the possible doors had been closed on us. During that year, we had put up the farm for sale because the young couple needed to move on, and the income from the farm was not enough to sustain them. The economy had dropped to its very lowest, and interest rates were so high that no one was able to sell their properties. We had tried to auction the farm, but the highest bid was lower than the bond we were still paying all by ourselves. Heinrich had calculated how much he had invested in the farm and wanted every cent back when the farm was sold. Every month, we were slowly slipping deeper and still deeper into the mire of debt. But then, after having prayed for the Lord to release us from that millstone around our necks, we received a phone call from a prospective buyer, and after months of legal complications, the farm was sold at a much lower price than our original purchase price. Besides that loss, we had our first partner's debt in the form of the bond we took for him, plus the debt of Heinrich's investment on the farm. This was a bitter pill to swallow. We had no job, no income, and R250,000 debt. we had lost our lovely home in Stellenbosch with its swimming pool and other luxuries. We had used up the entire pension that was paid to us when Walter left the university to start a new life on the farm, and we had sold the property that Walter inherited from his father and all my jewelry just to survive. In utter despair, we turned once again to God and continually claimed his promise in Philippians 4:19 that he would supply all our needs. It was a few days before we had to move out of the church house with no idea where to move to when Walter received another phone call from the same professor at the university where he had applied for the position as lecturer. "Have you found a job yet?" the man asked tentatively. "No, not yet." "Why?" Walter felt a tingle of expectation, a shimmering of hope, as he listened while holding his breath. When we informed the other applicant that he got the post, he said he was not interested anymore because the salary was too low. "You are therefore the next in line. Are you still interested?" Walter's face lit up, and he winked at me as he replied, "When can I start?" Once again, our Father had provided just what we needed at the very last minute. Walter once jokingly said he was going to speak to God about his nerve-wracking timing when he gets to heaven. But as the time went by and we started to understand the character of God, we had to admit that God's timing was always absolutely perfect. How else would we gain experience and learn to understand and trust him under all circumstances? The path that leads to eternal day is not the easiest to travel, and at times it will seem dark and thorny. He wants you to exercise earnest faith in him and learn to trust him in the shadow as well as in the sunshine. Ellen G. White, Sons and Daughters of God, page 323. The end of chapter 7 of Dwelling in the Secret Place.